So that's Koestler. So let's look at the guy Rubachev, and well, at least before I look at Rubachev. So attractive about communism was its anti-fascism and its efforts to resolve the social question. It failed Koestler because of its failure of individual morality, its failure to be able to account for the sentimentality, what I call, according to this book, the humanitarianism that Rubachev felt compelled him at times. He had a completely fascinating life in many other ways. He was late in his life, he became a believer in parapsychology. You know, the occult. He founded the only academic chair in parapsychology in the Western world. He became very ill. He and his wife committed suicide together, which they wrote about. It becomes a big text for people who believe in allowing suicide for sick people. So all his life he was a figure of controversy and brilliance and nastiness. He's a very complex character, but that's not our issue. Let's look at the guy. Why am I having you read this novel instead of a court transcript? I was asked. It's a lot of reading, and partly, I can't help but believe that because I enjoy reading this novel, you will enjoy reading this novel. So there's a certain, I will force you to find pleasure in this. I admit that. But there is something. I have a better rationale. I could have had you read court transcripts. But I wanted you to read the novel because it lets us get inside a person in 200 pages in a way that you couldn't get inside a person if I just gave you paragraphs or pages from, let's say, some real testimony, which I'll read you about in a moment. So you see this man's recurring struggles. You see this sort of strange tension between his toothache on the one hand and work historical matters on the other. So it lets you get inside this person. It gives you a full person in a way that I couldn't show you with anyone else. It's also a novel which is very historically acute. I think it actually does capture what the world knew about the show trials in 1938, because all these confessions were public. We've subsequently know much more about them because of the opening of archives, but he has this capacity, I think, to capture some truth about this kind of person that Rubachev is in a way that I couldn't have conveyed to you before. And I hope I can convey to you some sense of what it felt like to be committed to anti-human rights. So that's my excuse for doing it. Well, who is Rubachev? Well, you get this early on. He's an early convert to communism. He's in the Leninist left-wing branch of this revolution. He believes in the Vanguard Party. And he is a tough cookie. He's like the Jesuits of the Communist Party. This guy sent out into the outside world to make contact with communist countries, with communist parties. Even in Nazi Germany, you get this when he meets this Richard, I think, in Berlin. He had been in jail before in Belgium. I mean, in other words, he's a tough, hardened man who believes in this cause and will willing to live all his life with the fear of being tortured, and was in fact tortured by these regimes. So he stands for in this novel for a real believer. A real believer who comes to have second thoughts, not about the system in general, or even the movement of history, but comes to have second thoughts about these particular versions. So, what are some of the central tropes? One of the central tropes in this book is his struggle with the notion of the I, which is sometimes called the grammatical fiction. Remember, the whole last section of the book is called the grammatical fiction. The silent partner, the sort of character who seems to be there listening to you even when you believe yourself to be into the we. And you might remember these conversations when we all sort of think of I as someone listening in on ourselves. And how you kind of think about yourself as a kind of watching what you're thinking about. The novel captures that sort of sense of the irrepressible I in the context of a man who wants to believe in himself as being a representative of the we. So that's a central struggle in Koestler's view Rubachev is the struggle to relate the I and the we. Is there some way that you can be an I and still believe in the interests of the we? Now you remember there's several sort of sections I could read you. Listen to Rubachev. This is when he's in his interview with Ivanov. Listen to Rubachev. He said, "Fine. There's one thing I would like to repeat to you. You've now repeatedly said you, meaning the state and the party, as opposed to I, that is Nicholas Salmanovich Rubachev. For the public, one needs, of course, a trial and legal justification. For us, what I have just said should be enough. That is what he just sort of said, is that you should not have this I. It's not I versus them. It's them. It's us. It's this unified version. It's this unified version of a party. And by the time we get to the end of the book, now I'm talking about at page 250, at page 250, at page 250, at page 256, he's struggling about how he should die. And so one version of an I would die in silence, say nothing, would die with a noble gesture, with a moving swan song on your lips, pour out your heart and challenge your accusers. That would have been easier for an Orwell, but I overcame that temptation. He then tells the court that I will die in some sense, not as an I, and not as a person with personal honor. I will die as someone who acknowledges, at that moment at least, that he is still part of the great we. Though we know at the end he doesn't. He can tap out I. So that's the struggle. At the end of the book, we get this sort of notion that for all of that, he is going to end up some version of an I. Now, the other thing about Rubachev, he understands himself to be part of a vanishing group of people. So it's a standard feature. Everyone knew it. Remember the picture on Ivanov's wall? Remember they kept saying all these guys that are gone? They were referring to what everyone knew to be at the time when pictures are gone. So, I'm sorry. Here you have Stalin with one of the early. This is Yesov was someone who was killed in the purges, and here you have Stalin walking along without him. In this picture, you'll have a postcard beside saying "Watch the gold and silver," and somewhere here there's Trotsky. This is a slightly different card. In this one, these posters, the signboards are replaced with these slogans, which don't exist in this picture. But there are many others like it that we could have showed you, in which there's Trotsky standing there with Lenin in 1917, and Trotsky's now gone. Trotsky had been murdered in Mexico. Trotsky had been kicked out of the party. So in other words, Ivanov understood that he was one of a large number of these people who were being erased, that history was gone. And he's aware of this as the book moves forward. Sorry. I'm sorry, go back to. Okay, so he gets himself as a part of a dying breed of people who are being eliminated. Now, the central theme, I think, of this book is this theme of the self. Of the self in history, and I'll get to that in somewhat more. The self in history, meaning basically being that everyone needs to understand that history is this sort of great river that's moving forward, and nothing else should stop it. You've already shown, says Ivanov to him, you've already shown a tendency to humanitarian scruples and other sentimentalism of that sort. He's kept feeling sorry for what he did with Alanova, his secretary. And so, but he speaks about when he talks about what upsets him and what he's being blamed for is so 10 million people are forced to work in the Arctic, so 5 million farmers and their families are thrown off the work. So engineers work with the idea that if one error in their calculations, they're going to be taken to prison or the scaffold. All of that we need to we were said we need to deal with because what we're doing is something radical and important and historical. So we are, as he puts it, we're tearing the old skin off mankind and giving it a new one. Don't you find this wonderful? Says Ivanov to Rubachev, and so periodically, what you get in this book. Let me just read you one other passage on this. Is page 7. This is page 76. Again, he's reflecting back on how he treats Richard, the German communist. There were so many who did wish to speak. For the movement without scruples, she rolled towards her goal unconcernedly and disposed the corpses of the drowned in the windings of her course. Her course had many twists and windings, such was the law of her being. And whosoever could not follow her crooked course was washed under the banks, for such was her law. The motives of the individual did not matter to her. His conscience did not matter for her. Neither did she care what went on in his head and his heart. The party only knew one crime, to swerve from the course laid out, and only one punishment, death. And this comes out periodically, remember in the discussion about what we would call mens rea, the notion that you have to know you've committed a crime. Remember they said it's irrelevant to the engineer who was executed for having the wrong theory of how you make nitrate. It's irrelevant because who cares if you had the right or the wrong view, if you thought you were committing a crime. That's bourgeois subjectivism. You were, as defined by the course of history, on the wrong side of nitrate production. And consequently, the great course of history moves you aside. Now, on this notion of political algebra, it's an interesting question, because you think this book is, in some sense, ends up being a book radically anti-reason. It's like the Enlightenment gone mad. And there is a version of this book. There's a version of what people understand communism as the Enlightenment has gone mad. 1,000,000 divided by 1,000,000 is 1. As Robachev says, if you regard history as mathematics, it's sort of simple. Humanity is understood as a group. And what Rubachev keeps coming back to, or is hinting at, and what large numbers of people in Enlightenment critics said also, is that pure reason is never enough. The great Enlightenment figures, David Hume, Adam Smith, all the great Enlightenment, Rousseau, all the great Enlightenment, said you're not going to just ratiocinate your way through. You need sentiment, you need the passions, you need some other moderation, you need something else through which to reason. So what the criticism of this book, what comes out in this book is, in some senses, you see here, political algebra on the one hand, which is what the party wants to say. Where political algebra is, humankind is one. Stalin tells you what that one, what the mathematical operations to be, and that's it. And any feeling you might have about this that would cause you to pause in your reason is simply to be eliminated. Every Enlightenment figure would say that that's not true.